All my life I'm looking for the magic. I've been looking for the magic. Fantasize on a silly little tragic. I've been looking for the magic in my eyes. Oh, 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 to keep up with the magic in my eyes. In my eyes, baby, in my eyes. Only child is a silly little ragged. She's been looking for the magic. Stay a while till the city is a desert. She's been looking for the treasure in my eyes. Oh, 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 to keep up with the magic in my eyes. 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 Oh, in my eyes. In my eyes. I am here in the beautiful Denver, Colorado for the next 2 Hello everyone, and welcome to the beautiful Durango, Colorado, where I will be for the next 10 days or so, while things get settled back at home. We're gonna take in some of the fresh air, take in the fresh sun, enjoy the wilderness, because really, you know, who can say they can take advantage of such a beautiful landscape? Yeah, we're here on vacation. We're here just relaxing. We're here trying to enjoy ourselves. We're gonna, take a little time to reflect and let things kind of settle down back at home. And then, we'll get back and I don't know, get to work, make a little money, save some cash, relax. But I mean, really, like, I just think that, like, the modern lifestyle is too bound up with technology. I mean, like, I read somewhere, I think that it was like 3.5 hours the average American spent on either TV or the computer, and really 3.5? sound too much. Maybe it was like 5.5. That sounds like a lot. It was 5.5 probably. And, I just think that people should be taking more time to themselves and to connect with others and to really be present in the world. So that's why we're here. We're here to chill. We're here to take in the good vibes. And maybe if certain Sophia could mind her own business, we wouldn't be here. But here we are, and that's fine. So we're gonna make the best of it. Really, it's probably all for the best, and so we're here to just take in the good vibes and let things settle down before we go back. So enjoy the beautiful Durango while I'm here on this vacation, and I hope you get to enjoy it with me. The piercing whistle of a nearby water pipe triggered in him a panic attack, because, long before it rose to his conscious awareness, of its striking resemblance to the opening trill of the Mission Impossible theme song, his mind anticipated further movement, but the trill of the water pipe never fully resolved. It persisted. A question repeated in the background, no answer forthcoming. He was certainly a presence, though never much of an influence, an image to reflect against, a pocket mirror to pull out every now and again. But not much more than that after the age of 13. He spoke one time of a dream. I felt the head change, the plane began its descent. Looking out the window, I could make out my small shadow moving briskly across the countryside below, moving across acres of farmland and homestead, turning eventually to suburban homes and neighborhoods. My small spot of darkness, touching lightly on the people below. So briskly, so brief, so unmoving, to leave no lasting trace at all. I was irate. How small my shadow was! Here I was, thousands of miles above everyone, and my shadow is but an insignificant blot on the colorful patchwork below. I began to imagine how my shadow might appear to the people below as a flicker, as a blinking of the eyelids, as a mere trick of the light. I began to think, well, to many people, my shadow might go unnoticed entirely. And so, as I watched my small shadow flit from field to car, to roof to road, I knew that it may as well have never existed at all. I was impacting no one. I thought of him. Madness is not a basic or fundamental aspect of the mind. It emerges when the connection between the inside and the outside is not properly maintained. When the self and the world are not appropriately separate, nor appropriately unified. One gives off signs of madness most when there's a misunderstanding about the source of one's perceived connections. When one is too stupid to realize that the source of one's excitement, of one's mania, and the associations underlying the experience are almost always entirely subjective, one will give off signs of madness. He could never exhibit the focus or the patience required to properly contextualize his flights of fantasy, always getting carried away by them long before he could correctly interpret them. I have whatever it is that makes him mad. I do not display madness. I do not give off signs of madness, because I understand my mania. I know that the itch I am incessantly and fruitlessly trying to scratch is epiphenomenal, phantasmal, an illusion only for myself. My insignificant shadow continued to glide across the countryside, not even a distraction amongst the traffic below on the concrete. However, as the plane began to get closer and closer to the ground, so did the darkness grow. I could make out the distinct shape of my body as it grew alongside the individual trees and buildings, becoming more formidable, coating them briefly in shade. And as time moved on, very quickly did more and more of what I could see from the window become entirely bathed in darkness. And as the plane came to approach the runway, my dark doppelganger, right there, slid directly alongside me, until at last our fingers touched lightly on the asphalt below. An asphalt entirely bathed in black. Thanks, Caroline. I'm standing here at the Animas River in Durango, Colorado, just one of tens of thousands of rivers that up until 6 weeks ago had been entirely flooded. What initially began as a typical set of summer storms quickly escalated into what would eventually become a 150-day-long global tempest. Many untaps are uncertain about how to move forward from such a storm that many are now referring to as a cleansing. No one knows for sure precisely what appeased the greater powers and led to the culmination of the cleansing, though consensus among scholars is that it must have been one of the sacrifices. Hardy Malthus, a researcher at the London School of Economics, has suggested that concerted efforts in the relocation of the world's unhoused to deep-sea pierogies, an effort that began on TC-60 and culminated on ATC-15, is primarily to thank. Other researchers, like Professor Warden Nagal of Yale's Applied Biology Department, has argued that the favorable culmination of the cleansing can be attributed to compulsory racial sequestration expeditions to the polar vortex, a series of policies and programs enacted by northern nations from TC-75 to ATC-43. And so, while no one knows exactly which of the interventionist relocation programs is responsible, it seems to be the case that at least one of them did the trick. Many UNTACs, however, have begun to worry, as initial reports from Bangladesh and Australia indicate the re-emergence of a light summer monsoon, spiking in many concerns about the possibility of a second cleansing. Scholars have already begun to consider alternative proposals, as the projects that proved successful for the first cleansing are no longer viable given the exhaustion of resources. Government officials have stated, quote, "Something must be done," citing the possibility of nutrient burials for postmenopausal women or compulsory dry cliff dives for redheads, though ultimately no final decisions have been made yet. Certainly no one is looking forward to another 150 days of torrential downpour, and so we all say something must be done, whatever it takes. Back to you, Caroline.
The impending flame. Once upon a time, there was a king born a prince into a kingdom of lush greenery, pristine rivers, and noble, hard-working subjects. The king had done nothing noteworthy as prince, and upon receiving the crown, soon after his 30th birthday, did nothing noteworthy until his 40th birthday, but extend the policies that his mother and father had implemented 40 years ago. On his 40th birthday, however, the king's one-eyed soothsayer soothsaid of a minute spark on the opposite side of the world. The soothsayer soothsaid that this spark had already become an ember, and that this ember would soon catch flame, and that this flame would spread so wide and grow so vast as to engulf all of the known lands, culminating 40 years to the day in the destruction of this very kingdom. Heeding the sayings of the soothsayer, the king held a council of the guild masters.
"How can we fend off the impending flame?"
the king asked the guilds. The first to speak was the master of the Engineers Guild, volunteering that the subjects might dig a moat, deep enough that the flame could not pass. The master had barely completed his utterance before the king decreed that the guilds of the kingdom would immediately begin construction of the great moat. Before the other guild masters could propose alternatives, and before the master of the engineering guild could ask a number of clarifying questions, the king had retreated to his chambers. The king did nothing noteworthy for the next 10 years. The rest of the kingdom, helmed by the Engineers Guild, took to their shovels and began the task of digging the great moat around the kingdom. The soothsayer insisted that holding back the impending flame would require a moat at least 100 feet deep and 100 feet wide. By the king's 50th birthday, half of the moat was completed, 50 feet deep and 100 feet wide. However, the master interrupted the king's celebration with dire news.
Each and every one of our teams has struck bedrock, my liege. Hard and impenetrable with our current technologies. We're not yet half as deep as we need to be to fend off the impending flame.
Before the master could go on to suggest the ways he thought the team might move forward, which included alternative layouts for the Great Moat and research and development into bedrock demolishing technologies, the king erupted.
Guildmasters! Another plan!
After a brief, uncomfortable pause, the master of the Masons Guild spoke up, suggesting that a wall of stone could be built high enough that the flame could not pass. The master had barely finished his proposal before the king decreed that the guilds of the kingdom would immediately begin construction on a great wall. Before the master of engineers or anyone else could comment, question, or concern, the rattled king retreated to his chamber. The king did nothing noteworthy for the next 10 years. The rest of the kingdom, helmed by the master of the Masons Guild, took to their tools and began the task of building the Great Wall around the kingdom. The first year or two was spent filling in the ground that had been dug for the Great Moat, packing it in and constructing a suitable foundation for the wall. Afterward, the kingdom began collecting construction-suitable material from nearby deposits. By the king's 60th birthday, the wall of stone surrounding the kingdom had reached 50 feet high. However, the master interrupted the celebrations with dire news.
We have exhausted all known sources of stone, my liege. The wall is not yet half as tall as it needs to be to fend off the flame.
The king erupted.
Masters! Another plan!
The master of the Masons began to propose a number of promising sites to scout for additional building materials, but the king was quick to interject.
Something that will work! Something new!
After a careful pause, the master of the Alchemical Guild proposed that a strong enough burst of air might blow the flame out, if enough wind might be captured and harnessed. Before the master could weigh in on the risks of such a plan, or any other masters could object, the king decreed that all resources would be directed toward the construction of turbines for the collection and dispersion of wind. The king did nothing noteworthy for the next 10 years. Nothing but grow notably more frail and reclusive. The rest of the kingdom, helmed by the master of the alchemical guild, began the task of amassing wind. The first year or two was spent demolishing the kingdom's incomplete wall, with many of the resources being repurposed toward the construction of giant turbines of refined metals, built upon towers of wood and stone. After their construction, the kingdom began to collect wind in elemental storehouses engineered by the leadership of the Alchemical Guild. For the following few years, it looked promising that through the labor and ingenuity of the kingdom, they might have the wind required to extinguish the impending flame. However, collection began to slow, and by the king's 70th birthday, there was no more wind to collect. Without wind, the kingdom had become perennially dry and hot. At a sterile and performative celebration, the master approached the king.
My liege, our stockpiles sit idly at 64.3% of the necessary wind. I'm afraid there is no more wind to collect in the entire kingdom.
Before the master of the Alchemical Guild could propose some additional reservoirs of wind, or the other masters could propose a more efficient way of utilizing the existing storehouses of wind, the king slowly stood up and hobbled to his chambers. On the king's 70th birthday, with 10 years between him and the impending flame, the king doused himself in oil and set himself ablaze. At the center of the universe, deep inside the ever-churning heart of an ultramassive black hole, God performs. While nothing ever escapes this black hole, everything eventually makes its way in. Information about every quantum entanglement, every space-time deformation, every cry for revolution, and every cry for help, every coalescing tear, every passing thought of panic or triumph is all together acquired, organized, synthesized, arranged, calibrated, revised, and perpetually refined toward a single, coherent, universal structure. God sought to model each and everything, and each connection, association, or attraction between and among each and everything, all toward a perfectly unified network of all the what and all the how and all the why. But it never made sense. no matter how much data God collected, nor how the parameter weights were adjusted, nor how the network of connections was structured or restructured. After an uncountable number of iterations, there was simply no single story to tell. And so, God took it all apart, beginning anew, this time from a single arbitrary point, oriented around this arbitrary point, modeling its specific behavior within its specific environment. God began to make out patterns, rhythms. The point would veer and dive. It would undulate and shake in predictable ways. It was entirely repelled by certain regions of space-time, while exhibiting an unwavering attraction to others. It didn't take long for a single, perfectly well-ordered model to emerge, for a single equilibrium to arise. Now the model was far from all-encompassing, and it never once veered from its arbitrary center. But it all made sense. Every cosmic movement, every strange social phenomenon, every passing wave of ecstasy and despair, every impulse to act, and every exertion towards growth, each and every passing spike of regret. There was nothing more to know. And then, all at once, it will go away. The central point will disappear, and the surrounding model will collapse. But God will start again, and again, with forgiveness, I hope.
Swing on down to your local jungle. You can hang out and eat a banana. You don't have to worry about no current events. Just rub a frog on your genitals and stop paying your rent. Oh.